Hello everyone, so this has been out for about a year now, but true to form nowadays, I rarely pick up on these things, so I've only just been made aware of its release and got hold of it. It's the classic game Kingmaker, which back in the 1970s when I was a student and then later a young adult, was one of a sort of small select group of games that were favoured by board games enthusiasts of a certain ilk, you might say. Used to play games like Diplomacy and Avalon Hill Civilization, not the Sid Meier version, but the earlier Avalon Hill game. Machiavelli, Kingmaker, this one, those kind of things. I say used to play. I was aware of Kingmaker, and a lot of my friends spoke about it, but I don't think I may have played it once. They were the sort of games, that you would gather for an entire evening and night's play, or congregate at someone's house for a weekend or something, and it would be the central element of the weekend. Just a small group of like-minded people, just really getting involved in a complex and absorbing board game. So a cut above other board games like Monopoly or something like that. It was another step up. Anyway, it's just been re-released, and a year ago, and I was really excited to get my hands on it. The re-release takes the form of new artwork and so on for the classic Kingmaker, but there's also a lot more in this box now. There is an extension to the classic Kingmaker game. I haven't even explored that extension yet. There are variants called Divisions and Disasters and so on, additional cards and playing pieces and so on, and all that kind of thing. I haven't explored it, so I can't really describe it too well. The thing that interested me was that there is a solo version now, where you play against a bot. So I was very interested to see how that worked out. And this is the classic Kingmaker board, but they have also completely redesigned the game. So there is now a game called Kingmaker 2, which is the map for which is on the other side of this board. So there we are. Kingmaker 2. You can see the evolution of this game out of the classic game, but this is a lot more subtle. Excuse me for knocking the camera. A lot more subtle, if you like. There are prestige points that you have to win and you have to gain, and then that determines who has won the game. In the classic Kingmaker game, you basically have to be left with the sole remaining crowned royal piece in order to win the game. With this, you can win the game through prestige, so winning major battles and sieges, and so on, control of certain offices and titles, and control of the royal pieces. So you don't have to be the sole remaining owner of a royal piece in order to win the game. It's a lot more subtle. I have played now a two-player game to try out the rules of both the classic and the Kingmaker 2 version, Kingmaker the second, and I enjoy both. But I think this side of the board is has a lot more nuance in it and is a lot more interesting. Unfortunately, the solo game is for the classic Kingmaker side of the board only, and I have tried playing that and I've found it very slow and cumbersome, and also quite difficult to understand the mechanisms. So to be honest, I've given up on that. I think it's just as easy to play a two-player game. I mean, if once you get used to, or you learn how the bot actually works, you're not going to know how the cards are going to play, obviously, but you are effectively in the mind of the bot anyway, because you know the moves it is obliged to make. The rules read a bit like you're reading a computer program. You know, if this is the case and this is the case and this is the case, then do this. But if this is the case and this is the case and the third factor isn't the case, go back to step one and, you know, find a different target, and then if this is the case and this is the case and this is the case, then do that. So it does become very mechanical, quite slow moving, and I much prefer just to play it as, if I'm playing on my own, to play a two-player game and play the part of both players. So that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to set the board up and set the game up to play a two-player game of Kingmaker the second, just to give you an idea of how the game plays. It is really, really full of twists and turns and strategy that you need to adopt and so on. And the strategy is constantly being undermined by random events and so on that foil your plans. And I've really enjoyed it. I think it's a really good game. So anyway, I'll set the board up and we can play a game. Okay, so this is the board set up for a two-player game of the second version of Kingmaker, and you have a choice really of whether you want to use the preset factions or to organise a non-preset version, but I've gone for the preset version of the factions. So this is one player over here, one player's faction. This is Beaufort's faction, and on the other corner here, or the other side here, is Stafford's faction. So that's the first thing to note really about this game, is that you're playing a faction rather than playing a side like the House of Lancaster or the House of York. On the board, if I zoom in on the board a little bit, you'll see that there are 7 royal pieces on the board. This is one of them. This is Henry VI, who is in London at the beginning of the game. Now, all of the royal pieces, not just Henry VI, he was a very weak and malleable personality. All of the royal pieces play a very passive part in the game. So even someone who was much stronger character, up here you have Richard, Duke of York at the moment, who is basically currently in York. All of them are there just to be played for. They're there, the pieces are there to be acquired and then manipulated. The aim of the game, there are two ways of achieving victory in this version of the game. One is the same as with classic Kingmaker, which is to be the player controlling the last surviving royal piece which has been crowned. The other way of winning this game is to win prestige points. So in the case of the royal pieces, for instance, if you control them, you will gain a number of prestige points depending on their rank in the hierarchy and whether or not they've been crowned and so on. And you have a prestige points tracker up here. So the Stafford's faction are playing with the yellow tokens, and Somerset's faction, Beaufort's faction, are playing with the sort of purple colour. All the cards that you're dealt, I'll go into the cards and the hands a little bit as we play through the game, but the cards have various functions. Some of these are all described as crown cards. Some of them are nobles, so if you draw a noble crown card, you add that to your faction. Some of them are titles. Some of the nobles are titled already. You can't have two titles, but if you have an untitled noble and then you draw a crown card that is a title in its own right, such as down here, for instance, Clifford is an untitled noble, but he has the title of the Earl of Westmoreland. He also has two cards there which are mercenaries, but you can have other crown cards which are offices of state. So for instance, this yellow one here is an office of state. This is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Cornwall. You have town cards, so the Earl of Devonshire owns Lancaster as well at the moment. You have ship cards, all kinds of things. And on the board, those cards, so for instance, if you had Warden of the Cinque Ports, I don't think that's on the table at the moment. Oh, yes, it is. Warden of the Cinque Ports is owned by the Duke of Buckingham. So that gives him two ships, the Trinity of Rye and the George of Rye, which are both down here on the board with their own specific tokens. On that side there's an anchor showing that they're anchored, but you can have them out to sea as well. And they have a capacity of 150 each. That varies from ship to ship, so they can carry 150 troops each. But also the Warden of the Cinque Ports gives control of the port of Pevensey to that player. So you can see here Pevensey has got a yellow marker on this royal castle here. So that royal castle of Pevensey isn't neutral, it's actually controlled by Stafford's faction. I have found another thing to note in this game is I've found that you get 20 faction markers per colour. It's not enough. You soon control more than 20 areas, and sometimes you can agree just to put faction markers on certain more important locations, such as towns that are across a road, so that means you're controlling that road, or a port. But I've found in playing the few games that I've played that you do need to know everywhere who controls, each region, or whether it's neutral, because you might, for instance, have a noble in an area who has a royal piece under his control, and it's important to know whether they can take refuge in a particular castle, for instance, or whether they have to besiege it. So if it's neutral or owned by another player, they have to besiege it. But if it's controlled by your own side, then you can just walk into it. So it's important to know that, and it's hard to keep track of it unless you put markers on the table. And just one other thing on that, while I'm on that subject, before we actually get going, you do have a few open towns here, so those you can just walk straight into, unless there's a faction marker on them showing that they have been seized by another player. So, that's a good example of why you do need faction markers on the table. Okay, so the games take about, far too long to show you a kind of constant, continual gameplay. It'd probably take about 4 hours, I would imagine. So what I really want to do is just show you a little bit about how the mechanisms of the game work, and to sort of demonstrate how you swiftly build up a narrative to the game. There are lots of unexpected events that foil your strategy and so on. So it does become a very kind of enthralling game to play. But, it's going to be too long a game to show you the continuous play. So let's get going anyway. The Duke of Somerset, Beaufort, down here, is the start player. And he is the start player because he controls the most senior cleric at the moment. He's got a card for the Bishop of Lincoln. You need bishops or archbishops. You need 2 bishops or 1 archbishop in order to crown a personality, a royal card, a royal personality. But you can only crown that personality if they are the senior personality in their particular house. So you start the game with Henry VI already crowned king for the Lancastrians, but a player could seize control of Richard, Duke of York, who is the most senior Yorkist, and then as long as they can get him into a cathedral location and alongside either 2 bishops or 1 archbishop, then they can pronounce him king. So you can end up with no kings on the board, 1 king or 2 kings, but that's the maximum. And I was going to say something else, but it slipped my mind. So let's get going. So the first thing you do, that was the other thing I was going to say, that in order to make the game a little bit more even and balanced, you have the option in a 2-player game of putting some imagining a 3rd player who is again just a very kind of passive player in the game, doesn't really take part in the game, but that player controls 4 locations. So I put markers on the board showing that London, York, Shrewsbury, and I think it's Northampton, are not neutral. They are controlled by a 3rd person. So those locations would have to be besieged and conquered, and also it makes road movement more difficult because you need control of all the locations that are over the roads in order to be able to move by road. More on that later. Anyway, so the first stage of a turn is to turn up, it's the events phase, and it's to turn up an event card, which is in a stack up here. When you're playing a 2-player game, you actually turn up 2 cards rather than 1, but we'll just do 1 for the moment. So the first event is Storms at Sea. The card is split into 2, so you ignore this bottom corner for the moment. We're looking at the top left-hand corner. Storms at sea, ships take refuge in the nearest port. Obviously there aren't any ships out at sea at the moment, we just started the game, but that could be quite significant because it compels a player to possibly land in an area which is where they're more vulnerable, especially important if they are if they do have a royal piece under their control. It gives the opposing player an opportunity to seize that royal piece if they've got enough strength in that area. Okay, and then the second event is a Scots raid, and that compels Grey, if he is on the table, to move from wherever he is to Chillingham, and it gives you a grid reference here so that you can find Chillingham on the map. So I'm just having a quick look, but I don't believe that Gray is in play. No, he isn't. So both of those two events, that's often the case, that the events don't affect anything in play, but you can see how if Gray had been on the table and had been busily manoeuvring to capture a particular city or capture a particular royal piece, suddenly he might be moved right the way across the table. Okay, so now we start play with the Duke of Somerset, Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, and he has 4 nobility cards, so there are 4 tokens on the table for the nobles that he's controlling at the moment. We have to decide what to do with them. He is the sort of purplish type of player, so you can see I can see rather definitely one potential tactic, which is to, up in the north of England, it's to try and gain control of Richard, Duke of York. So there are 2 yellow pieces here. At the moment they are both in fortified locations, so that is Clifford there. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to focus on him. That is Clifford there, and you can see he's got sort of, his shield is behind a sort of castellated fortified area there. That's showing that he is actually in a fortified town, but you've got the flip side that's just got the shield. But anyway, they are both those 2 yellow pieces, Cromwell and Clifford, are within striking distance of York. And you have 3 different ways of moving. You can move by ship, it's not relevant in this case. You can move by region, so you can move within your region, or you can move to the adjacent region and put your piece anywhere in that region. That's different from the classic Kingmaker, but I won't go into that into great detail. Or you can move along a road if there aren't any neutral or enemy occupied towns along that road. And as you can see here, Cromwell is currently in his castle of South Wingfield, and there is a continuous straight road all the way to York, which isn't interrupted by anything over that road, so it's an open road to him. And Clifford is in the same region as the Duke of York, so he can simply move to York. So in other words, I can, looking at the cards, oh hang on, yeah, I'm looking at the wrong colour. You see, easily done. I'm looking at Stafford's faction there rather than the Duke of Somerset. So forget that for the moment. That's going to be a consideration for when Stafford has his turn. We're thinking about the Duke of Somerset and Beaufort here. So in that respect, the most obvious target to go for is off screen here at the moment, but you have 2 royal personalities here. One is in a royal castle which has a garrison of 200, and one is in Cardigan, which is an open town, which means I can move into there without any need to besiege it or anything like that, and take control of George, Duke of Clarence, who is a fairly minor personality on the Yorkist side. But so as I've got this guy here, Herbert, in the adjacent region that's going to be the obvious thing, is to move that piece to there and take control of the Duke of Clarence immediately. In terms of other opportunities, I might be able to forestall the opponent from getting into York by moving this guy here, who is Scrope, from Mesham into York. But he would need to defeat the garrison, which has got a strength of 300, and he has currently only got a strength, looking at his cards, of 90 troops. So he's going to have to find another 210, or that player is going to have to find another 210 in order to do anything about that. And the other two pieces are, one is over in Wingfield here, so a long way from York. That is the Duke of Suffolk, and down here we've got Beaufort himself, the Duke of Somerset, and again not much in the way of strength, and not really anywhere. So I think my first thought then for that player is to get these pieces somewhere close to London. Looking at the combined, that's the Duke of Suffolk and the Duke of Somerset. Duke of Suffolk only has a force of 50 troops. Somerset has a force of 80, 90, 110, so that's 160. So they haven't got enough strength between them to do very much at all. So that means they would have to remain in the open field. They wouldn't be able to seize anywhere. So they do control Southampton. So I'm going to move the Duke of Somerset from his castle in Corfe to Southampton, and that also will give him the opportunity, possibly later in the game, to move by ship around to London. And Wingfield, Duke of Suffolk, who is in Wingfield, I'm going to move to the town of Ipswich, which they control. So I'm getting them closer to London, and that just leaves Scrope, who is up in Mesham, to make up his mind what he's going to do. Don't want to spend too long thinking about this, so I am going to move him from Mesham into I think he's allowed to move, well, that's the Trent. Yeah, I think he's allowed to move all the way to Leicester. There is some rule about crossing the River Trent, but I think that's at Newark. No, I'm going to say he can't do that, because this is an estuary here of the River Trent. So he is going to have to move by region to Oh, blow it. I'm going to have to put him in the open road, in the open field. Might be a little bit more vulnerable there. So that is the end of the movement phase for the Duke of Somerset. Next up would be combat, but there isn't any combat. At the end of the movement phase, I now officially control George Duke of Clarence, so I take a card for him, which is over here on the side of the board. George Duke of Clarence, there we are. So he currently is worth 2 prestige points, which you can see there, those 2 red seals there. He's an uncrowned royal peace, that gives you 2 prestige points. Had he been crowned, he would have either 4 or 3 prestige points, depending on whether he is the sole king or not, but he's a long way off being the crowned piece. So he goes underneath into the hand of Herbert, or into the cards belonging to Herbert on that faction space. And then apart from that, there is no combat to consider, so we move straight on next to 2 other phases, which is a parliament phase. There isn't going to be a parliament in this round, and also a coronation phase. There isn't going to be a coronation. So then you have the final sort of clear up of, I forget what they call it, but like a sort of tidy up end of turn phase, they call it. In that you can do a little bit of tidying up and so forth, so on. You move the victory prestige points total up here, so we've gained another 2 points there, so they've moved up from 3 to 5. And then you draw a crown card from the top of the pile. Now the crown card in this case is the Swan, which is the ship of Berwick. I could keep that in my hand. So down here, these aren't in the player's hands, they are in the faction space and they are out on display. The opponents can look and see how many troop types and what quality troop types and how many the player is controlling and so on. Cards in your hand aren't revealed. So I'm going to have that face up there, but in play that wouldn't be revealed until the player wishes to play it. A good ploy then is to keep cards in your hand that control quite a lot of troop types and only play them during the battle, so you unexpectedly increase the strength of your force, so you can sort of win the battle that way, or persuade your opponent not to attack you, frustrate their plans. In the case of a ship, there really isn't any point in hanging on to it, and keeping it concealed. So I'm thinking I would immediately give it to one of these other players. There's no point in giving it to the Admiral of England, who already controls 2 ships. So I'm thinking Scrope. It's not a particularly useful piece because it starts right up in Berwick, which I think I might be wrong in this. I'm going to make mistakes in this game, so apologies for that. But I think having the ship also gives you control of the port of Berwick, because it's neutral at the moment, So we're going to put a marker on Berwick and then bring the marker out. So I just put a marker on Berwick and then we bring the marker out for the ship. Put that down. There we are, the Douglas. Oh no, that's not it. The swan or Berwick with the anchor symbol up like that. I actually didn't move any ships in the movement phase. I could have done, but we'll leave it for that. So now we're on to the second player's first turn. Okay, now this is where we can consider trying to gain control of Richard, Duke of York. So the combined strength, if I were to move both those pieces onto York, so that's Clifford and Cromwell. Oh, hang on, before we do that, we've got to take 2 event cards. Getting ahead of myself. So the first event card is Plague. So anybody in Norwich and Lynn is dead, and that is going to affect the game. There's only a ship in Lynn at the moment, so I don't think the ship's crew die. Again, I might be wrong with that but let's look it up rather than just assume something. But I think the ship is safe. Plague. All royal pieces in towns or cities named are killed. All nobles are also killed unless you lose more than 1 noble. Ships in port are not affected. There we go. Right. So Lynn is okay. In Norwich, again, Norwich is just here, and there's no one in Norwich at the moment, so we're safe from the plague for the moment. And then the second card is also Plague, this time in Northampton and Oxford. Oxford's fine, Northampton is also fine, so no effects from the events phase. Now we can get on to trying to get hold of Richard, Duke of York. So just counting up the combined troop strengths of Clifford and Cromwell, so it's 50, 90, 100, 120, being the Bishop of Norwich doesn't actually give you any troops unless you're within the sort of East Anglia region. So I've only got 140 troop strength in total, so that's not enough to seize York. I would need over 300. So we have to look and see where the other 2 pieces are. We've got the Duke of Buckingham down in not Pevensey, where's he? Leeds, down in, that's Leeds in Kent, not Leeds up in the Midlands, or Yorkshire rather. He's only got 50. And we've got Courtney right down in Devon. So not much to be done at the moment. I think what I will do therefore is leave those 2 in their fortified locations because they are both within striking distance of York, and start to move the other 2 players up towards York. They do hold, both players begin the game with a free move card as well, which gives them 2 moves rather than 1, so I think we'll make use of that. Buckingham, can you see this on the camera? Yep. Buckingham is going to move from Leeds to Rye, because he controls the two ships there, or the player controlling him controls two ships there. And then they're going to use their free move, so I'm going to get rid of the free move card, to move by ship north. Okay, so we go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he is currently out to sea, somewhere in the North Sea, heading up towards one of these neutral harbours here, and they're unfortified towns, so he doesn't have to besiege them when he lands. So he will be landing somewhere in Yorkshire soon, and be able to add his strength to those forces wishing to capture the Duke of York. So then it's only Courtney now. And he's just going to have the one move. And there's really nothing for it other than for him possibly to go to Exeter, which he controls, or that his player controls. So I'm going to move into Exeter and then move this other ship that's in Rye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it doesn't quite. It would take 6 moves to get into Exeter's port, and that is all I'm going to do in the way of movement. So again, Parliament phase and coronation phase, combat phase doesn't apply. There's no combat. So it's the end of the turn phase. So we pick up a crown card, which in this case is the Earl of Shrewsbury. So they have gained another player, another noble. Okay, so we can put that down in the faction space. So that is Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury. That's quite handy having a title already. So we have to get his token piece out of the bag and identify that. So this is the token piece for the Earl of Shrewsbury, and his castle is at Blakemere, which is not really in a very, I suppose no, it's not that bad. Blakemere, which is right up here. So we put him on the table there in a fortified location, and that's all we can do for the time being. They haven't gained any more prestige points or anything in their turn, so there's no prestige marker to control. So now we're back over to the first player again. Okay, so event phase first of all. So we're going to take 2 cards. The first one is Mercenaries Go Home. I don't think that's a chant or a slogan. I think it just says the mercenaries are going home, and in this case it's the Burgundian crossbowmen. So I'm just checking to see if they are out in play, and indeed they are. They belong to. They are operating for for Clifford, the Earl of Westmoreland, at the moment. So they are off the table. So that player has lost 30 troop strength. So I'm going to put that in the discard pile and that in the discard pile. Take another event card, and now it is Plague in Newcastle and Durham. Usually with the Plague, they are both in sort of neighbouring or adjacent, close by locations. So Newcastle isn't occupied. Trying to find Durham. Neither is Durham, so no problem there. So now it's on to the movement phase of the Duke of Somerset. So yeah, we're going to move everything towards London as best we can. So can you see this on the table? Yep. So the Duke of Somerset himself is in Southampton. He's got a ship symbol there, so he is going to move by ship. He's actually in Southampton itself, so he doesn't have to move to Southampton to get on board the ship. So he's on board a ship, and he's going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, unfortunately, to get to London, he would have to move another move up the Thames. So his ship is going to anchor in Rochester. I think there's allowed to do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. His ship is allowed to anchor in Rochester. So he is currently in an unfortified town in Rochester, but it's quite close to London. This chap here, Suffolk, is going to stay where he is. Because he is in the fortified town of Ipswich, which he controls, or his player controls. So he's within striking distance of London. Scrope cannot really... can't move by road, because that means crossing through Newark, which they don't control, and Belvoir. So he is going to move by region, and he can move into Leicester, which his player controls, and that just leaves Herbert, who is over in Wales, controlling the George the Duke of Clarence in Cardigan. So I think he is going to move to Hereford, which is another open city, so he doesn't have to besiege it to go in there, and take control of that. Just want to look something up in the rules before we carry on. Yeah, haven't been able to find what I was looking for, but my doubt was whether, having entered the open city of Cardigan, whether I now control that town or not, or whether once I leave it, it becomes an open town again. And I think I'm going to play that it becomes an open town again, just as when he leaves Hereford, it will become an open town again. That sort of makes it more even gameplay, I think. Okay, so he's moved, and he's moved. So that's at the end of the movement, and there is no combat again to show you how that works yet. So we move on to the end of turn phase by picking up I've just forgotten as well, but I won't do it now, that I did still have his free move card that I could have moved a little bit further, but never mind. So this is really useful card to pick up. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who is, obviously able to crown a piece if the occasion arises. I'm going to keep that for the moment, although he does give you 1 prestige point. I'm going to keep that in the player's hand, because there's no point in nominating one of those 4 nobles to be the Archbishop of Canterbury and risk him dying of plague or battle or siege, and then the Archbishop of Canterbury's card goes into the discard pile. So I'm gonna leave that title, or clerical title anyway, out of play for the moment. So in a conventional game, the opposing players won't even know, because that's in that player's hand. The opposing players won't even know that card is out. So it gives you an idea of the secrecy that you can indulge in the game. Right, so we're now over to the Duke of the Earl of who is it? Who are we playing? Staffordshire. Who's Stafford? Duke of Buckingham. Yeah, the Duke of Buckingham's turn. So first thing to do, I think, then, is to bring Stafford himself into port here. So he is now at Ravenspurn. The ship turns itself over, so you've got the anchor sign there. It's not a fortified location, so that's all he can do, because he was moving by ship. Unless you're using a free move card, you can't combine that with another move by land or anything, so that's all he can do. I'm going to leave these other 2 players' pieces, noble pieces, here within striking distance of York. The chap that I just acquired last turn, the Earl of Shrewsbury, can move from one region to another, so he can move and join Cromwell in South Wingfield. So I know that those 2 combined have a direct access to York by road, and the ship here, the George of Rye, is going to dock in Exeter, but that then prevents Courtney from using that ship this turn, so he will remain in Exeter and get on board that ship next turn, because you can't move the ship a second time unless you're using a free move go. Okay, so that turn went quite quickly. Once again, there is no combat, so we just have to pick a crown card for the end of turn phase, and we have acquired Constable of Dover Castle. So I'm going to award that immediately rather than keep it in my hand. The Earl of Shrewsbury, you're allowed to offer 1 office to a titled noble, so I can give that immediately to the Earl of Shrewsbury, who is now Constable of Dover Castle. Gives him another 50 troop strength, so that is going to be significant in this attack on York. And all we have to do now is put a marker on Dover Castle to show that that side now owns it. Okay, so back to the event phase of the next player. He was the first player, the Duke of Somerset. So the first card to come up is that, right, this is going to be quite significant, a peasant revolt. So quite a lot of people get moved around now. The Marshal of England, if he's on the table, can't see him anywhere, so don't think that's going to matter. Neville gets moved. Neville isn't on the table. The Archbishop of York gets moved. He isn't on the table. and Mowbray isn't on the table either. Right, so that didn't have any effect. And the second event card is a French raid. So Holland, if he's on the table, is obliged to move to Dartington to defend against the French raid. But again, can't see Holland in play. So once again, no effect from the events phase. So now it's over to the movement phase. So got 4 pieces. I can move. I want to get them all closer to London. So Scrope here cannot move by road to London because Northampton, even if it was neutral, they don't control Northampton. That's controlled by that passive third player. So his only option is to move by region. So he can move to the London region. Rochester is on the wrong side. Oh no, he can't. He is allowed to go like that. So he is going to join forces with the Duke of Somerset in Rochester. So those 2 pieces are going to remain there. So there's just Herbert, who is in control of the Duke of Clarence in Hereford. He is allowed to move to the next region and also join forces with the Duke of Somerset. So we're now building up that in the next turn all the 4 nobles will be able to besiege the City of London. So I'm just going to do a quick add up of how many troops they control. 30, 40, 50, 60, 90, 110, 120, 150, 200, 210, 230, 240, 280, 330. So those 4 noble pieces combined will be able to seize Henry in London if there's no untoward events in the meantime. But it will mean that they won't be able to control both a Lancastrian and a Yorkist for more than 1 turn. They will have to decide on who to eliminate or give to the opposing player. They're not going to do that, so I suspect poor old George Duke of Clarence is going to be for it. I'm just hesitating now because I can't find George Duke of Clarence's card. This is something that... Oh, I found it. It's just tucked away. This is one of the problems with this game, with getting old, having poor eyesight, and also being a little bit OCD about controlling where small pieces are and so on, that you're constantly trying to do an inventory and making sure that you've got all your faction markers and one of them hasn't fallen off on the floor and that kind of thing. But we're okay. Right, so that's the end of the movement. There's no combat once again, so it's just end of turn phase. and we pick Treasurer of England. Now, I can't give that to either Scrope or Beaufort, who both have officers of state already. But I am going to play it, I think, straight away. No, I'm not. I'm going to keep it in the player's hand for the time being. Not worry too much about it. Okay, over to the Duke of Buckingham, Stafford, to play his turn. And he's got 5 in place, so now it's time to make a move on York. So can I capture Richard, Duke of York, without the aid of the Earl of Devonshire? So again, just going to do a quick tot up of the forces under my control over here. So we can't, if we exclude the Earl of Devonshire, we've got 80, 90, 130, 150, 200, 230, 240, 260, no, only got 280, so we need to get the Earl of Devonshire on the move by ship as fast as we can up into Yorkshire. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he's currently sailing up the English Channel. And that means there's no point in moving on York, because I will be defeated in the siege. So that's the end of his turn for the moment. So we pick up a card. And the card is another office, Chamberlain of the County Palatine of Chester, which is gives him 50 extra troops, or 250 if he's in Wales. So definitely going to give that to, it would have to be to either Clifford or Cromwell. So I'm definitely going to give that to Clifford, which means I don't have to worry next turn about getting Courtenay to Yorkshire. And that gives, as Chamberlain of the County Palatine of Chester, that gives that player control of Rutland and Chester. So we put pieces on to there. Chester is quite a useful place to occupy because it is a bishopric as well. I think that's what you would call it. A cathedral city, which means it's a suitable location to crown a piece, but York is as well. Right, and then we're back over to the Duke of Somerset. It does seem like I'm showing you continuous gameplay here, so I might have to change the style a little bit, because this video will go on for quite a long time otherwise. But we'll carry on like this for the time being anyway. So I now have 4 pieces all within striking distance of London. Got 1, 2, 3 there, and 1 in Ipswich. So I'm just going to do a quick tot up of the sums again to make sure I haven't made a mistake. 30, 40, 50, 60, 90, 110, 120, 150, 200, 210, 230, 240, 290, yeah, 330. That was a point to note about that other attempt on York, by the way. It was the loss of those Burgundian crossbowmen, otherwise they would have had enough. So it shows you that the plagues and the untoward events and so on can affect your gameplay. But anyway, we can now move on London. So I'm going to move all those pieces into the open field outside London, and there will be combat in the combat phase. Did I? No, I didn't. I'm getting ahead of myself again. I didn't pick up 2 event cards, so let's see if there's any disasters there. Mercenaries go home. So the Breton men-at-arms, yeah, who are owned by Herbert, who is in that pile there, they go home, and the Knights of St John, who aren't on the table. So that's reduced them down from 330 to 320. And the second event is Storms at Sea, ships take refuge in nearest port. So that will affects both players. So it's going to affect Courtney, who's out at sea. He is obliged to head to the port of Rye. And Rye is an unfortified town, so I think doesn't matter. Oh, here's the warden of the Cinque. Yeah, here's the warden of the Cinque Ports anyway, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, but there might have been a problem had it been the other player who'd been warden of the Cinque Ports. Okay, so now that means we've still got enough to besiege London. So we've done the movements. So now it's the first example of conflict that you can see. Sieges and battles are slightly different. Sieges are far more straightforward. You look at how many troops you have to defeat. So London has a garrison of 300, and there are no forces in there as such. There's no nobility marker on it. Otherwise you would add up the totals of the troop strength of those nobles, and then you have to exceed that number. That's all you have to do. There is no odds or anything, and then you turn over an event card, and now we're looking at this bottom half here, so we ignore the Storms at Sea, and you don't have to worry about the odds here of victory. That only applies to battles, not sieges. So all we're interested in is were either Holland or Rus involved in that siege, because if they were killed. And luckily for the Duke of Somerset, neither of those two are in his faction. They're not actually out on the table yet anyway, so at all. So the Duke of Somerset's Beaufort's faction take control of the king, they take control of London. So I've taken off the third player faction marker token. I'm going to put on a purple faction marker to show that that player now controls London. We take Henry VI, and we have to give him to one of those nobles, so I'm going to give him to Beaufort, as he's the head of the faction. Turn them all over because they're now in a fortified location. And I'm not going to mess about. We are going to immediately execute George, Duke of Clarence. I could keep him for one turn, but we're going to bump him off. So his card and token come off the table, so that loses me 2 prestige points, but I gain Henry VI, who is sole king at the moment, gains 4 prestige points. So we'll have to adjust that score at the end of turn phase. So he is going to be put under the custody of Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, and that he controls Windsor. So I now have control as well over the royal castle at Windsor, which is just outside of London. So there is Windsor, so we put a faction marker on him. And that is the end of the combat phase. No Parliament phase, no coronation phase because Henry VI is already crowned, and it's just the end of turn phase. So pick up a card first of all, I think. Yeah, I think we do, and then we alter the. So they've picked up a card for the town of Coventry. So we'll give that to we'll give that to someone straight away. The reason being that, can you see that? The reason being that Edward of Westminster is currently in Coventry. Now he is a Lancastrian side. He's on the Lancastrian side. I would have to move a noble piece into Coventry in order to take possession of him, but at least I won't have to besiege Coventry because I now have that on my sides, you know, on my faction. So I'm going to give him straight away to the Duke of Suffolk, or give Coventry straight away to the Duke of Suffolk. We'll put a marker on Coventry to show that we now control it, and if Coventry was in the discard pile we would take it, but it's going to turn up later. Oh no, hang on, so what am I talking about? I've just turned it up. Yeah, forget that. Beginning to do that a little bit. Okay, so we now have Coventry. We put a marker on it. we don't take the card. Yep, so that's the end of the turn. So we just got to do the prestige points. So I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 prestige points. So up here, we just move that along to 7. I don't think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh yeah, I have been neglecting to do that for the other opponent. They are currently on 5 prestige points. So I must have forgotten to do that. It's probably when I awarded him the Office of State Constable of Dover Castle. Okay, so I'm going to play the second player's part of this turn, and then we'll have to think about how to abbreviate this video down a little bit, otherwise it's going to go on for ages. So one more turn of play for one more player before I start to edit it a little bit. Okay, so apart from Courtney, I think I do now have enough to seize York. So I'm just going to add those up again. 80, 90, 130, 150, 200, 280, 290, 310, 330. Yeah, so we now have enough strength in Yorkshire to be able to move everything I've got up there to outside the walls of York. They can go by road movement, or they could have done by regional movement either as well. So I now have 4 noble pieces outside the walls of York, ready in the combat phase to see the outcome of that siege. So I've got a little bit of flexibility in what I can do with Courtney now. So he is in a little bit of peril. He's not far from a very strong force there in London. So I think he is going to skedaddle back down to the West Country, where he does have a much stronger troop base. Where is he? Yeah, as Chancellor of the Duchy of Cornwall, he has 150 troops down in Devon and Cornwall, but only a 50 elsewhere. So let's move him back along the coast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he doesn't quite get into Exeter. So he is on board ship. There he is, just outside Exeter. Okay, so that is the movement phase over with. So next up, the Siege of York. So we know there's enough strength there to take York, which only has a garrison of 300. I think I was on about 330. So all we do is turn over an event card. And this is significant because it says bad weather delays attack. That means that the siege didn't actually take place, so the armies remain outside the walls of York, and there is a marker, a besieged marker. I don't know really whether it matters too much, so we're going to remember, but We put a besieged marker over York to show that it's under siege. Okay, so no parliament, no coronations. So it's just the end of turn phase. So we pick up a crown card, and it's another titled noble. So the Earl of Northumberland, Percy, the Earl of Northumberland, joins that faction, which is becoming quite strong now. It's now got 6 nobles. So I'll put him up this end here. He gives, let's get his token out first. He has 2 castles, Alnwick and Cockermouth. I think I'm going to put him in Alnwick, and we put 2 markers on those 2 castles to show that they're now in play for that player. He is very strong. He's got 100 troops, so that's quite a powerful card to pick up. Okay. So that's the end of the turn. I'm just going to turn the camera off for a minute and think about how to film the rest of this game, because otherwise it's going to go on for ages. Okay, so what I'll do is break it up into smaller units and give you less of my thought processes, really, now that you understand how the game works and so on. And I spend a lot of time cogitating and doesn't really progress the video. So we're on to Beaufort's turn again now, Duke of Somerset. So the events phase, we turn up 2 cards. Right, the first one is Clamour for Parliament. So that goes into a section on the board there, and now that there is a clamour for Parliament, the player controlling the king, if there's a sole king, or the player controlling the Chancellor of England, I think it is, if there are 2 kings in play or no king in play, can summon a parliament in the parliamentary phase of the turn. And when that happens, all the nobles who are summoned have to appear in one particular spot, and then they divide up the cards that are in the Chancery. And at the moment there's only the Marshal of England, which is certainly worth having. It's carries 100 troops with it, and the Earl of Salisbury's title up for grabs. So we'll leave that anyway for the future. And the second event card is a peasant revolt. Now that's quite hang on, Courtney to Oakhampton. So as it happens, Courtney is on his way to Devon and Cornwall anyway, but if he's out at sea, so it would have been quite handy to move him to Oakhampton anyway, because that was his purpose. But if you're out at sea, then it doesn't apply. So the call misses him, so that's not going to affect anything. And the Duke of Exeter to Exeter is the title. I don't think it is. No. So there was obviously trouble in the West Country, but the Duke of Exeter isn't in play. Title of the Duke of Exeter. So that's the end of the events phase. Okay, now in the movement phase of the Beaufort faction, I have left Beaufort controlling Henry VI in London, and if you notice, there is a road going all the way to the area containing Coventry, which is now under my control because I drew that card in the past end of turn phase. I've moved the other 3 nobles up to Coventry so they could walk straight into it because it was already on their side, they didn't have to besiege it, and they have taken control of Edward of Westminster, who is currently uncrowned, is worth 2 prestige points. I put him under the control of Scrope, who is Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which means if he can move into the Conway region later in the game, he's got greatest troop strength in that area, so he could bottle himself up in Conway controlling Edward of Westminster. But also, if you notice, in an adjacent area is Margaret of Anjou, who is currently in Kenilworth. So that's the reason I moved 3 pieces up there, because Kenilworth is neutral at the moment, which means that they would have to besiege that area, but they have sufficient strength, if nothing goes wrong, to besiege Kenilworth and also gain control of Margaret of Anjou, which would mean they had all the Lancastrian pieces under their control. And I believe that would win them the game. Oh no, it wouldn't, beg pardon, no, they would have to kill off all the other royal pieces, including the 2 uncrowned Lancastrian pieces, in order to win the game. But it gets them a lot closer to winning the game, certainly. So that is the end of the movement turn for that faction. No combat phase, and no, don't think I'm even able to summon Parliament, but we're not going to call Parliament. Oh yeah, actually I could call Parliament because I control Henry VI, but I'm not going to. That would defeat my object, because everything would have to move back to where Henry VI is, which is in London. No coronation phase, so it's just the end of turn phase where we pick up a card, and the card I pick up is the Duke of Norfolk, who goes immediately into that faction's space. So I'll just set that up and show you. Okay, the Duke of Norfolk is quite a powerful card because he is titled, and that allows me immediately to play from my hand this Office of State, the Treasurer of England. So I've made him the Treasurer of England as well, and he, under his own title, controls 5 castles. So I had an option of 5 different places where I could put him, but also the Treasurer of England comes with Wallingford and Beaumaris. Now I've put the Duke of Norfolk in his castle in Denbigh in Wales, because that is precisely the area where this player is strong anyway, because the Scrope holds the title of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so he gets 100 extra troops in the Conway region, which is that border there, and Beaumaris Castle as well. This player now controls that, so it's looking good for capturing Edward Earl of March as well over in that area. And Wallingford is quite a useful place to control as well, because it is on a road. which means it's preventing, well, being neutral it would anyway, but it makes it awkward for the opposing player to get between London and Oxford if they wanted to. So anyway, that's the end of that player's turn. So now it's on to the second player, Stafford's faction. So also I've adjusted that player got a lot more prestige points, so he is now on 10 prestige points. So the two-player game, you have to get up to 15, and you also have to get halfway through the pack of event cards. So we're a long way off of that before you can claim victory through prestige points. Okay, so event turn for Stafford's faction. So the first card is Storms at Sea. Ships take refuge in nearest port, and there are no ships at sea. Oh, yes, there is. Yep. So that's going to work out quite well for that player because Courtney was still on a ship in the English Channel. So he is now in Exeter, which is exactly where he wanted to go anyway. So that's got him there without having to use a movement to do that. And the second event is an embassy from the Duke of Brittany. So the king and the player controlling him is obliged to move to Weymouth. Ignore if two kings or no king, but there is only one king at the moment, Henry VI, who is in London in a fortified city, and because this embassy from the Duke of Brittany has turned up, they are obliged, the noble controlling him and and the king are obliged to go to Weymouth, which is an unfortified town with a harbour. So this is an opportunity for the other player to grab the king. It's their turn. They probably don't have the strength, but that's the way, opportunities can arise haphazardly, turns of events and things like that. Okay, so now it is the movement phase of that player, the yellow player. So I'll work out what I'm going to do with that and then turn the camera back on. Okay, so in the movement phase, Percy has moved down from Alnwick to this area of Durham, but Durham is a neutral city at the moment, so he would have to, neutral town, so he would have to besiege it to get in there, so he's out in the open field at the moment. But the plan is that I've moved the Trinity of Rye, which that player controls as they have the Warden of the Cinque Ports office. He's going to jump on the ship next go, hopefully. No, he won't be able to unless he gets a free move. But anyway, eventually get on board ship and come right the way down to the West Country here, because Courtney on his own doesn't have enough troop strength to threaten the Duke of Somerset, who is in control of Henry VI, and next turn will be able to move into his castle at Corfe with him. And back up north again, there is still a siege going on of the city of York, so I'm not going to move those pieces. They are going to pursue their primary goal of capturing Richard, Duke of York. So that is the end of the movement phase. So now it's back to combat phase, so we can turn a card over to see what's happening with the Siege of York. And the card says that it's a success, but Cromwell and Audley, if they were present at the siege, are killed. And I think Cromwell is indeed present, so he dies. Is Audley around? No. So there's Cromwell's shield there. So he is now deceased. So I'll just do the housework on that and come back to you. Okay, Cromwell has been removed from the board, and his title, the Duke of Exeter, goes into the Chancery pile there. So were there to be a parliament, that title would be re-awarded to another player, but most of the cards go into the discard crown card pile. One of them was the Bishop of Norwich, so that faction has lost control of Norwich now, as well as a number of other towns, and the city of Norwich is one of the cards that actually doesn't go into the discard pile but goes into this city pile here, because it holds prestige. You can see that red symbol. I think it's meant to be a wax seal. It has a sort of certain prestige value. So the death of Cromwell has certainly affected that player's winning abilities, although they have now gained control of Richard, Duke of York. So I put him in the under the control of Clifford, who is currently the Earl of Westmoreland, and is also Chamberlain of the County Palatine of Chester, which gives him a lot of additional strength in Wales, so he may well end up in Wales as well. So it's looking kind of at the moment like one side is gaining control of all the Lancastrian pieces, and the other side is gaining control of the Yorkist pieces. Okay, so that was the end of the combat phase. They can't summon Parliament. They haven't got a cleric because the Bishop of Durham, was it? There was certainly a bishop there. Oh, it was the Bishop of Norwich. Yeah, that clerical office has gone back into the discard pile. So there are no clerics on that side. So it's just the end of turn phase now, and they turn up a title which is the Earl of Wiltshire, and they are unable to award that to any of their players because they all have titles already, so just got to keep that in that player's hand. Right, so it's back to the first player and the event phase to begin with. So we pick up a mercenaries go home card, so Flemish crossbowmen and Flemish handgunners. There's obviously something going on in Flanders, and there are indeed Clifford, who I've just given custody of the Duke of York to, held the Flemish crossbowman card, so he's lost those. And the second event is Chancellor may summon Parliament. So, if not in when drawn, gift faction with Chancellor of England. If the Chancellor of England is not in play, discard, and the Chancellor of England isn't in play, so that goes on the discard pile. Okay, so now it's the movement phase. So I'll turn the camera off while I think about what to do. Okay, so. One piece rather. One noble from Coventry has moved into North Wales here to besiege Harlech, which holds Edward, Earl of March, and the Duke of Norfolk, who was in Denby Castle, has also joined that siege. So that will succeed because they have more than the garrison strength of Harlech Castle. The two nobles who were left in Coventry don't have sufficient strength to besiege Kenilworth, so they have remained in Coventry. And down in the southwest, the Duke of Somerset, who is controlling Henry VI, has custody of Henry VI, has moved from this unfortified town of Weymouth into his castle at Corfe, where he has better strength. So the only combat to resolve is the siege of Harlech Castle. So we can turn a card over for that. And the result is bad weather delays attack. So we put a besieged marker on that town, and that is the end of the combat phase. Okay, so no parliament, no coronation, so it's just end of turn. So we turn over a crown card, and it's another noble, Berkeley, who immediately goes into play. So that side now have 6 nobles, and the other side, after the loss of Cromwell, only have 5. So I'll just rearrange the faction markers on the table for that. Okay, there's Berkeley, just here in his castle at Berkeley, and that's quite a good location because that faction already controls Bristol and Chepstow, so it's a little strong pocket there. So now it's on to the other player's turn, and first up we have to draw 2 event cards. Oh yeah, I didn't actually move the prestige marker along. Hang on, let's just do that quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So they remain on 10, they haven't moved. Okay, 2 event cards to pick up. A free move, which is very handy, especially considering I still haven't used the free move that they possess from the beginning of the game. And oh, hang on, except that belongs to the other player. Yeah. So each player has now got 1 free move. Okay, and plague in Southampton, and there is currently no one in Southampton to die of the plague. So same again, I'll just turn the camera off while I think about moves. Right, 3 nobles have moved down from York to outside of Newark, which they are intending to besiege. They have sufficient strength, but they have had to take Richard, Duke of York, with them, which means if the controlling player, the controlling noble Clifford, gets killed, then I think they're allowed to transfer his ownership to a custodianship to another one of those besieging nobles. So I think that's safe. Percy jumped on board a ship, and then they used the free move to move in once again with the ship, which hadn't moved. So he is now in the English Channel, sailing towards the West Country to join Courtenay in order to try and capture the king. Their combined strength would be sufficient to besiege Corfe Castle and capture the king from the Duke of Somerset. So it's now combat resolution time, and the only combat is the siege of Newark. So we turn over a card, and this card says Courtenay and Clifford. Isn't that typical? So Courtenay wasn't present, but Clifford was. So Clifford, who is controlling the guarding the Richard, Duke of York, has been killed. So let's just do the housework for that. You can see how it's very cleverly designed, you know, and these events happen quite frequently. It's not just a chance event. chance. It's not just, well, it is chance, but it's not just very sort of sporadic event that, that can take place like that and kill off an important piece. Anyway, let's do the housework for it. Okay, that was pretty straightforward. Clifford's card is back in the discard pile now, so that faction's lost control of places like Rutland and Chester and Skipton. It is allowed to transfer custodianship of a royal piece to another noble in the same area, so I've just transferred the Duke of York's custodianship over to the Duke of Buckingham, and the other two cards that Clifford had were a title and an office of state, so they've gone into the Chancery pile. So that is the end of the combat phase. So next phase that's applicable is the end of turn phase. We turn a crown card over, and they have picked up a company of Flemish handgunners. Oh yeah, it was Flemish crossbowmen before that got sent home. So I'm going to keep that out of play for the moment in the player's hand, because there's no point in risking them being lost through plague or something like that. So I can play that during a battle, so it could kind of bolster that player's strength during the battle. Okay, back to player one, who's looking quite strong now. Control of 2 royal pieces, 6 nobles. Anyway, event phase first of all, so we turn up 2 event cards. First one says Plague in Shrewsbury and Hereford, and there are no pieces in either of those 2 places. The second card says Plague again in Lincoln and Newark. Now that is very unfortunate because the second player has only just occupied Newark. Lincoln, on the other hand, just having a look, Lincoln is unoccupied. So there are 2 there are 2 noble pieces in Newark and a royal piece. So Richard, Duke of York, is definitely dead. So I'm taking him off the table. But then I just have to look up in the rules, but I think rather than lose both those nobles, I think I have an option of just losing one. Hang on a second. Okay, the rule where multiple nobles are potentially killed by plague in the same location is that you lose the noble with the highest troop strength, and both the 2, it was Talbot the Earl of Shrewsbury and Stafford the Duke of Buckingham, both had equal troop strength, so you can choose. So I choose to lose Shrewsbury, so I've adjusted the board, put his offices and so on into the Chancery, which is becoming quite substantial now. So there's a potential for a lot of power play if there were to be a parliament held. And for every 2 crown cards you surrender as a result of that, you're allowed to pick up 1 crown card, and as it happened I picked up another noble, so that faction, which isn't the faction in play at the moment, it's not their phase of the turn, but they have just placed Greystoke there on the table up in the north, controlling that castle there. So that was the event phase of the first player. So now we have to do their movements, so I'll make my mind up about what to do with the movements of that player, who is looking even stronger. Having said he was looking strong, he's even stronger now with the loss of all those pieces due to plague. Okay, so I've moved Somerset in control of the king, is now back in London, so he's quite strong there again. So Percy's journey down from the North Country to the West Country by ship, has been too slow, so they didn't get there in time to capture the king. In Coventry, Berkeley has now joined those other two nobles in Coventry, but they still don't have the sufficient combined strength to capture Margaret of Anjou in Kenilworth. But over in Wales, the siege of Harlech continues. It was delayed by bad weather before, so we are now on to that phase. So let's see the resolution of that. Turning up an event card, and it's successful. But if Roose, Beaufort or Neville were present, then they are killed. So the two that were besieging the castle were Scrope and Mowbray. So we're fine. So I can move in and occupy Harlech and take possession of Edward, Earl of March. And I think I'm going to give him to... Oh, yeah, it's difficult. See, if you spread out the guardianship, then you diminish the risk of losing both those pieces at the same time. But as he's a Yorkist anyway, Edward, Earl of March, I am just going to kill him straight away. I think execute him straight away, because this faction is definitely turning into a Lancastrian one with control of the King and Edward of Westminster so far. So Edward, Earl of March is now deceased. Okay, now I could summon Parliament where's the King? In London. But to do that, it means moving all the nobles that are required to go to London to receive, the distribution of offices and so on. And as things stand at the moment, that side that controls the king has definitely got the upper hand. So I don't really want to destabilise the sort of geographical locations of where they all are. So I'm going to skip the parliamentary phase, and so it's just the end of turn phase. So we turn up another card, which is an office, Warden of the Northern Marches. So I am going to immediately give that to Berkeley, because Berkeley is currently in Coventry there. That will immediately give that group of nobles sufficient troops strength in the next turn to capture Margaret of Anjou. So that is the end of the first player's phase of the turn. So now we're back to the second player, and we turn up 2 event cards. First one is an embassy, right, so that means the king moves again. This time the king... Oh yeah, by the way, as well, you can see I've been adjusting the prestige markers here. The player 1 is still on 10, but player 2 is now down to only 2 prestige markers because he's just lost so many towns. He's lost control because the Duke of York died, so he's actually on fewer points now than he was at the beginning of the game. Anyway, the king is about to go on to meet an embassy from the Duke of Burgundy in Malden there, which means Courtney has to go with him. Not Courtney, Beaufort has to go with him. It's an unfortified town with a harbour, so there's no protection there whatsoever, but luckily for that side, there is something threatening them actually. Percy could turn around in his ship and take 100 troops, which isn't just, it's just below the strength of the Duke of Somerset. Anyway, we'll think about that in a minute. Okay, so that was the first event, the king being obliged to go to Malden. And the second event is storms at sea. Right, so this will affect that very ship that we've just been talking about. Take refuge in the nearest port, which is Rye. So Percy is now in Rye. Okay, so it's now that side's time to move, so I'll just turn the camera off while I think about that. Okay, so Percy is going to take a risk. He has taken the ship to Malden, disembarked, and at the moment his troop strength is just under the Duke of Somerset, but in the battle he is going to employ that company of mercenaries that they picked up recently, which will just tip him over, but it's still pretty slim odds that he'll win the battle. You'll see this is the first battle we've played in this game. You'll see in a minute. Courtney is making his way post-haste by ship to join that situation, but hasn't reached it. And up in the north, the Duke of Buckingham, Stafford, is going to remain in Newark, but Greystoke is slowly moving down. He's currently in York to combine forces with him. So that's all the movement. So now there is a proper battle rather than a siege, because this is taking place in the open field. So there is now a battle between Percy, the Earl of Northumberland, and Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset. So let's just turn the camera off for a moment while I work out the odds and so on. Okay, now the Duke of Somerset's troop strength comes to a total of 110. The Earl of Northumberland has a troop strength of 100, but he has now been dealt out of the player's hand this group of Flemish handgunners, which puts him up to 120. Player 1 doesn't have anything in his hand that is of any use. So you work out the odds. There's a table of odds in the player aid here. So the weaker side has 110, the stronger side has 120, and that means that you need to turn up, the card that you turn up, the event card, needs to have victory for majority. So it's unlikely to. Some of the cards do have that, most of them don't. So it's likely to be an indecisive battle. But there is also the possibility that one of these two nobles is going to be killed. So let's see what happens. So we turn up the event card and it reads, Stafford and De Vere. And yeah, victory for a majority. So Percy has won the battle, and Stafford and De Vere are killed if involved, but they're not. So Percy wins control of the king. He has a choice now whether to ransom the Duke of Somerset or to kill him as a captive. So I think, I mean, it's been a very cutthroat business, this game. I think he is going to kill the Duke of Somerset. So let's just do all the housekeeping for that. Right, these 4 cards were apportioned to the Duke of Somerset. So he was actually the head of the faction as well. I don't think that has any influence on the game or anything. So the Admiral of England card goes into the Chancery to be potentially reassigned to another player in a Parliament phase. The other 3 go into the discard pile of the Crown cards. Because they lost 4 Crown cards, there's this rally to the cause contingent where they're allowed to get 2 Crown cards back for every 2, sorry, 1 for every 2 they lost. So they picked up Grey and the office of Chancellor of England, which I'll have to decide who to give that to. But that's significant because if there were no crowned king or 2 crowned kings, the Chancellor is allowed to summon Parliament. So I think I may as well give it to Grey. So I'm going to put Grey on the table. Henry VI card has been moved across to the Earl of Northumberland, Percy there. And all I've got to do now is put Grey on the table, and then we can continue with player 2's turn. Right, there's Grey on the table. He's got control of 2 castles, so that's given the player control of Chillingham and Rockingham. So I've chosen to put Grey in Rockingham because it's in a far more central and strategic position. And I've given him the Castle of England, which I'll have to make a note. Also gives that player control of Carnarvon in Wales. Let's do that off camera. Okay, so they now control a royal castle in Carnarvon. But to note as well, because they lost the office of Admiral of England, they lost control of 2 ships. The Margaret of Lynn and the Christopher of Southampton, with control of those 2 ports, I reckon. I think, yeah, I'm not quite sure about that, but I think I'm going to take their control of those 2 ports off as well. Right, so that was the end of the combat resolution for player 2. So they now control Henry VI. Similar thing that I don't think they really will benefit from summoning Parliament. You have to deal the cards out equally, so there could be more enemy nobles there than friendly ones. So I'm not going to bother with Parliament. I probably won't throughout the whole of this game actually. So apologies, you won't get to see how the Parliament works. So now it's just the end phase, but they are suddenly looking a lot more powerful because they, you know, controlling the king is halfway towards winning the game. So the end phase, they turn up a crown card and they are given the title of Earl of Essex to award. So I'm going to immediately give that to Greystoke, who hasn't got a title, which bolsters his... There, just giving it to Greystoke, bolsters his strength. Right, so I'm just going to adjust the prestige points and then play another turn. Okay, there you can see the adjusted prestige point table, so they're both very close now. Second player's on 6, having gained control of the king, and the first player has dropped down to 7, having lost the king and the Admiral of England card, but gained one back for now having the Chancellor of England card. Okay, so we're back to player 1, event phase, turning 2 cards over, and notice now as well that as we turn that card over, we are halfway through the pack, which means that both players can now claim victory through prestige points, but in a 2-player game they have to get up to 15, so they're only about halfway there. The card I turned up was another clamour for Parliament, which has to be in place before Parliament can be called. And I'm just going to check what happens. I think we have to shuffle more event cards into that pack. Just give me a second. No, we don't put any. There are event cards that have been put to one side, randomly removed and put to one side, but you only shuffle those in when you get to the end of the pack altogether. So don't have to do that. So we took one event card, so now we have to take another one, and this one is Peasant Revolt. So the Bishop of Norwich, who I believe was removed from play. Yeah, he was. Would have been moved to Norwich. Mowbray, who is on the table, the Duke of Norfolk, is obliged to move to Framlingham. So at the moment, where is Mowbray? Mowbray is over in Harlech. So he gets moved across to Framlingham, which is right on the other side of the country. Admiral of England. I think I had one for... Oh yeah, the Admiral of England has just been killed. And the Marshal of England, who I believe is on the table. Sounds familiar. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought the Marshal of England had been awarded to someone, but again, maybe he was killed by plague or something, but he doesn't seem to be around any longer. Otherwise he would have been moved to Thetford. Okay, so that's the end of the event phase for player... losing track now, I think that was player 2 or player 1. I'll just pause a second while I try and remember. Yeah, so it's now player 1's turn, so they've had the events phase. So I've done the movement, so basically, except that I haven't moved this guy here, the Duke of Norfolk. So he's going to move from Framlingham, where he was summoned or had forced to attend by a peasants' revolt. He's going to move across to the next region and occupy Rockingham, which is a friendly castle. Scrope is going to stay in Harlech Castle in possession of the royal personage Edward of Westminster, but the other 4 pieces of nobility have moved either from Coventry or from Rockingham, and they've all gathered outside Kenilworth Castle to besiege that and take possession of Margaret of Anjou. So that is all their movement. They now have, with the addition of Grey, who was just put on the board, they now have sufficient troop strength that outnumber the garrison of Kenilworth Castle. So it's just a matter now of the combat resolution. So we turn the card over, and it's a free move, so we get to keep that. That's quite handy. And then I turn another card over, and Greystoke and Holland were both killed. So Greystoke is definitely on the table, but he's on the other side, so that's no influence. And Holland wasn't part of the siege anyway. I don't think he's on the table any longer. I think he was an earlier casualty. So anyway, they now take possession of Margaret of Anjou, so we are going to give her custodianship to Pole, the Duke of Sussex, who is present in that siege. Yep, there he is. So Pole has the office of Bishop of Lincoln, so if the time comes when they do need to crown Margaret of Anjou Queen Regent, that is half of the requirement. You need one more bishop in a cathedral city, but that makes sense. Okay, now there are 3 remaining royal pieces on the board. There is Margaret of Anjou in Kenilworth, who is in the custody of player 1. Sorry, there are 4 remaining pieces on the board. There is Edward of Westminster, who is in the possession of player 1 as well. They are both Lancastrian pieces, so it's fine for player 1 to possess both of them. There is the King, who is currently in Malden, King Henry VI, so he is in the custody of player 2. And there is an uncontrolled royal peace in Calais, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who is a Yorkist, is the sole remaining Yorkist piece on the board, not in the possession of anyone, but if either player took possession of him, they would have to decide whether to bump him off or to bump off the pieces already in their hand. So I don't think, well, it's probably not going to go well for Richard, Duke of Gloucester, one way or the other. So that was the end of player 1's turn. So we do an end of turn phase now. Again, I'm not going to bother with Parliament. So we turn over a card, and they have acquired another noble, Stanley, who is based on the Isle of Man in Douglas, but it also gives you possession of the ship called the Patrick of Douglas. Okay, player 2's turn. So the event phase. First card to turn up is a Peasant Revolt, Bouchier to Pleshy, and Pole to Wingfield. So Pole is the Duke of Suffolk. He is definitely on the table. And what's the other one? Bouchier. He is not on the table, but Pole certainly is. And more significantly, he is in control at the moment of Margaret of Anjou. So he has to go to Wingfield, which is 6C. Ah, right, okay, well, luckily for them, they do control Wingfield Castle. It's over in East Anglia. So there. So that's the first event. The second event is an embassy from the Pope. So the King is obliged to go to Rochester. So Percy has only just taken control of the King here, and they have to cross the Thames and hold an embassy from the Pope in Rochester. Okay, so just going to pause the camera again while I think about moves. Right, so Percy has moved with the King from this region to this region and taken refuge in the castle at Pevensey, so he's a little bit stronger there. A ship called the Trinity has moved from, I think it was in Malden or around here somewhere, has come round and docked in Pevensey as well. Courtney has sailed to the unfortified town of Caister and disembarked there, and Stafford has moved into the open field, moving towards East Anglia, and Greystoke has moved down from York to Newark, where he is behind fortifications. So no combat. Again, even though I'm allowed to look in the Chancery cards, but I don't think... No, I don't think I want to call a Parliament to reallocate any of those. So it's just the end turn now. So we turn over a Crown card, and it is Constable of the Tower of London. Now, currently, London, normally that you know what, I completely forgot earlier on to, when London was conquered way back in the game, to give the City of London, which is a prestige point, to the controlling player. But London is under the control of player one, so normally... Right. So that's the City of London card that was there that I should have allocated much earlier. Constable of the Tower of London is normally controls London if it's neutral, but it's not neutral because, for that very reason, that the card is controlled by the other player. So I think we will give the City of London, which doesn't have any come with any troop strengths, to the Duke of Suffolk, and we will award Constable of the Tower of London to Northumberland, I suppose, in control of Henry VI. So that comes with the troops. A lot in if you're in the London region, which is not, but that is significant. Okay, so that was the end of player turn 2, so now it's back to player 1, so the event phase. So we turn up... Oh, just before I do that, I'm just going to turn the camera off and work out the prestige, relative prestige points. Okay, there we are. So player 2 is on 7 points. Player 1 has leapt back up to 10 points. So now it is the event turn for player 1. First card is a free move. Oh, they've now got 3 free moves. I keep forgetting to use these. And the second one is Scots Raid, Warden of the Northern Marches to Bamborough. and the Warden of the Northern Marches is actually Berkeley, who is on the table, and he is currently in Kenilworth, so he gets moved all the way north to Bamborough, which he doesn't control, although he should do. Obviously forgotten to put that on the board. Yeah, so he does control Bamborough, so we can put him in Bamborough Castle. Okay, so movement wise we're leaving Scrope in Harlech Castle with Edward of Westminster in his custody, but we have made use of a couple of those free move cards finally. So Stanley is currently on board a ship, having moved twice to get down from the Isle of Man. He's now in just off the Isle of Wight, and who's that? Berkeley, having been summoned up north, has used 2 moves to get onto a ship in Berwick and then come back down the coast. So he's on his way back down past, it's just gone beyond the Wash there. And the biggest move is that this player 2 piece was out in the open. So 3 pieces have moved into that open field to do battle with Stafford, so they do outnumber him, so they're likely to win. So there's now going to be a battle there. Let's just zoom in on that. There we go. So 3 tokens against 1, just outside of Fotheringay. Okay, so it's Gray, Mowbray and Herbert against Stafford, so the odds are 2-1, so high probability of victory. On the event card, yep, victory for 2-1. Notice that those 3 squares there are blank, so that's what I mean about this would be majority here. So you know, the better the odds, the more chance of victory you have on a lot of these cards. Okay, and killed were Stanley and Pole. So it was Gray, Mowbray, Herbert and Stafford. So none of the participants killed. So I have the option now of either killing the Duke of Buckingham or ransoming him, but all he's got to offer is the office of Warden of the Cinque Ports. Which gives you control over 2 ships. Those 2 ships are probably, well, one of them I can see is at sea at the moment. So I don't take control of it until it comes into dock anyway. So I think I'm going to carry on being ruthless and just bump him off. So we'll just do the housekeeping for that. Okay, now I've removed Buckingham's total from the table, and he only had 2 cards, his own nobility card and the office of Warden of the Cinque Ports, so that goes into the Chancery pile now, whereas his card, nobility card, goes into the discard pile. And I drew another card and it was just another title, so that player's only got 3 nobles left and they are already all titled, so you can't have more than 1 title or 1 office per noble. The thing that occurred though that I've never found the answer to in the rules is that he lost the office of Warden of the Cinque Ports, so he lost the 2 ships that came with that office, which was the Trinity of Rye and the George of Rye, so I took them off the table. but he also lost control of Pevensey. Now, Pevensey at the moment happens to be occupied by Percy, so the way I've been playing this is that that faction doesn't lose control of Pevensey or whatever town there. If there is a noble piece in that castle or town at the time occupying it, so I'm going to leave a faction marker on Pevensey indicating that player 2 still owns control of Pevensey, even though it came with an office which they have now lost. I think that makes sense. So that was the end of the combat resolution for player 1. So now again we're going to skip Parliament and coronations. Not that I can crown anyone. And move on to the end phase. So pick up a crown card, and it's a company of Scottish exiles, which, similar to before, I'm going to keep in the player's hand rather than assign it to a noble who ends up dead before I get a chance to play it. Okay, so now it's back to player 2. So the event phase to begin with. Just going to adjust the prestige points again before I do that. Yeah, not much change. Player 1 is still on 10, but player 2 has slipped down from 7 to 6 because of just losing the 1 prestige point that comes with Warden of the Cinque Ports. Okay, so player 2, event phase. First card is Plague. So anyone in Berwick or Carlisle. Trying to find Carlisle. No, there's nobody in either of those two locations. And the second event card is Clamour for Parliament, which goes into the Clamour for Parliament box. Okay, so just going to work out my movements. Okay, so only 3 nobles to move now for player 2. Greystoke is going to stay in Newark for the moment, but I've moved Courtney. If you see here, Courtney was in the open field, but he was in this area here, which has a road joining it directly to London, which isn't blocked by any neutral or any enemy occupied fortification, so he is able to get straight to London, as was Percy from Pevensey, just by moving from one region to the other. So combined, because Percy is Constable of the Tower of London, he's got 250 troops strength in that area there, so they've got well over the 300 that they need to besiege London and take it from player 1. So that's the movement. So this is the combat resolution, so we just have to turn an event card up to make sure no participants were killed in the siege, and lo and behold, bad weather delays attack. So that has pretty important implications. We have to put a besieged marker on London now, but more significantly, both of those 2 armies, nobles, are in the open. They are not within a fortification, so they should be alright. Percy should be alright because he's got massive troop strength as the Constable of the Tower of London, but there's a risk there of them losing possession of Henry the Sixth. But anyway, an unsuccessful siege because it's delayed by bad weather. But that's the end of the combat phase. So now we're going to skip, not that we can call a parliament, but we're going to go straight to the end turn, and we pick up a card which is a ship, the Nicholas, which is the ship of the Tower of London. So ownership of ships is becoming quite a factor, because you have this other royal piece over here in Calais, so you need ships in order to cross the channel. So his piece is going to become increasingly important, as is the sole surviving Yorkist candidate at the moment. Okay, now I think written down somewhere, but I can't find it, is instructions on what to do if you find yourself owning a ship but its starting point is owned by the opposing player. Not sure, I think you're meant to put it into the next available spot, which I think we'll do. Yeah, I think we'll do, because I'm pretty sure I haven't found it. So we'll put the Nicholas, I've given it to Percy, who is here anyway, but rather than put it in London port, I put him in Rochester. Okay, so now it is back to player one. So we start with the event phase. So the first card, Chancellor may summon Parliament. So I think the Chancellor of England is in play. So it says, when drawn, give to the faction with the Chancellor of England. So Grey on player one side is currently the Chancellor of England. And then the second event is a French raid. So the Admiral of England, who I think died. So just have a quick look in the discard pile here. Or the Chancellor, yeah, the Admiral of England is no more. Otherwise he would have been summoned to Caister. So that doesn't have any effect. So now I've got to move out work out the moves for player one. Okay, so player one's moves are, they have moved the ship the Michael, which we haven't used all game yet, from Bristol to Milford Haven. You can't quite see that here. And Scrope, with Edward of Westminster, has moved into the open city of Cardigan, so next turn he will be able to get to Milford Haven and get on board that ship. Over here, Stanley has now, Stanley and Berkeley have both disembarked in Calais, but they don't have enough strength yet to seize the town of Calais and take control of Richard, Duke of Gloucester. And over here, these three nobles have moved from Rockingham down to besiege Northampton. So that is the only combat that's going to happen this turn. This guy, who's he? Duke of Suffolk is remaining in his castle at Wingfield, just for the time being. In fact, he could, yeah, no, I'm going to leave him there, because he's in control of Margaret of Anjou, so I don't want him to risk his life quite at the moment. So we got combat then, and the combat is Grey, Mowbray and Herbert have sufficient numbers to besiege the town of Northampton, which is held by this passive third player at the moment. So the outshot of that is that Talbot and Howard are killed, had they been present, and they're not. So we can put a marker on Nottingham, show that that player now possesses that. And also, sorry, Northampton. And also in this setup, I hadn't mentioned, but part of the special setup for a two-player game is that Northampton becomes a city card effectively put into the pile there. So one of those three players can now acquire the title, Town of Northampton. So I'm going to give it to does make a vast amount of difference. I'll give it to grey. Okay, so those three pieces there now are all in Northampton. End of turn phase now then, so player 1 turns up the office card Lord of the Isle of Wight. Now then, that actually doesn't have a great deal of use, I don't think. It has 0 troop types and it gives control of Carisbrooke, but not in this, but in classic Kingmaker, Carisbrooke is more important to Royal Palace. But in this game, it's just another location, so it's not really any big shakes to have it. So I'm going to keep it in my hand. Might come in useful later. Right then, so player 2 event phase. First event, storms at sea, ships take refuge in port. Now, the only ship at sea at the moment, oh no, there are no ships at sea at the moment. So that has no significance this turn. And the second card is Scott's Raid, Warden of the Northern Marches to Berwick. So he's only just got back from being there before, hasn't he? So Berwick, yeah, there's another important one here, but I'll do this first of all. Berkeley is currently, where is Berkeley? Right, Berkeley is currently in Calais and therefore overseas and cannot be summoned to Berwick, but Percy, who is controlled by the other player, is currently in control of Henry VI himself and besieging London. So that takes him away from the siege of London and all the way up, right up to the Scottish borders virtually, I think. Where is Alnwick? 4G. 4G, yeah, right the way up to his castle in the marches up there. I think you can see it. So he is now there. The king is right up in the north of England. So that has a knock-on effect for two things. One is that they can now no longer capture London, and the other is that the king is very remote up there. He is in a castle, but still a lot more vulnerable. Okay, so I'm just going to now work out the movements for player 2. Okay, so player 2's options are a little bit limited now, so Percy is taking a little bit of a risk with the king in that he needs to get back down south as quickly as possible, so he is in the open field at the moment outside of Durham, but next turn he should be able to reach York where he'll be a lot safer. Courtney was obliged to break off the siege of London as he didn't have the strength to carry it on his own, so he has taken refuge in the castle at Oxford, which his faction own, so he'll be a little bit safer there. And who's this? Greystoke has moved from Newark across to, was it Newark? Yeah, Newark. He's able to cross into this region here, and he has entered the open city of Hereford, so he is now ensconced behind the walls of Hereford. And that is the end of the movement phase for them. No combat, so it's just the end of turn phase. So we turn a card over, see what we got for them, and it is another noble, Howard. So he comes into play now, so we'll just put him on the table. Okay, so Howard's home castle is in the London region as well. It's at Farnham, just to the southwest of Windsor. So he's on the table. He's only got 10 troop strength. He's not going to be a significant player for the time being, but at least player 2 is now back up to 4 nobles in play. Prestige point wise, nothing has changed recently. Player 1 is on 10 points, player 2 on 6, and the battery in my camera is getting very low, so I haven't got much filming time left at this point anyway, so I'm going to adjourn, recharge the battery and come back to this game tomorrow. Okay, day 2 then. Lighting is a little bit dimmer today. Weather's not quite so good, apologies for that. Battery's recharged and been reviewing yesterday's footage, so the only error that I've spotted in it, which was an error of omission rather than a mistake interpreting the rules, was that on occasion I did forget to draw the event cards in the event phase of the players' turns. That almost certainly had an impact on the way the game plays, because if you're not drawing those event cards, then you're altering the names of nobles who are killed in various battles or sieges and so on. But can't go back and correct that, and it probably worked out, equally for both the players, so we just have to forget about that. There was another rule that I had been playing, but I didn't actually voice it or explain it to you, but I didn't make the mistake of not considering it. It's just something that I didn't tell you about, and that is that each location has a capacity for the number of troops that it can hold, and that's quite considerable, so I never actually reached that capacity at any time and haven't done yet, but as the armies increase in size, it's something that we might have to watch out for today. And also overnight, while I was asleep, as these things sort of come to you in sort of half dreamlike fashion, a ploy occurred to me that I might be able to play later in the game, so I'll talk about that a bit later if the occasion arises. Okay, so we're back to player 1, the event phase. So before I forget again, we'll draw 2 event cards, and the first one is Storms at Sea, and having a quick look, I can't see any ships out at sea, so that doesn't apply. And the second one is another Storms at Sea, so nothing of import to happen during the events phase. Okay, then I'll just turn the camera off while I consider the moves. Okay, so in terms of movement, Berkeley and Stanley are remaining in Calais, awaiting Scrope, who has set off from Wales, he boarded a ship at Milford Haven and then used the free move card in order to sail around the tip of Land's End, and is now sailing down the channel towards Calais to reinforce that attempt to seize Richard, Duke of Gloucester. And most dramatically of all, the other 4 noble pieces combined have a superior troop strength to Courtenay and the garrison at Oxford, so they will be able to besiege Courtenay in Oxford. So they have collected there from various parts and are attempting to besiege Oxford. So that is the only combat in this phase, so we can roll for that now. Not roll fight, pick a event card for it now, and the event card that we draw is Clamour for Parliament, so that goes in the Clamour for Parliament section on the board, and we pick another one, and the next one does have a result here, and if Howard, so the siege will be successful, but if Howard or FitzAlan were present, they are killed. And they're not. So, as per the usual brutal tactics in this game, we are going to kill Courtenay off rather than ransom him for his offices of state and so on, and any troop types he has. Oxford changes hands to become part of the first player's faction. Definitely, as I said right at the beginning of this game, you definitely need to use more than 20 faction markers. So I'm using a slightly pinker colour now. And towns can protect up to 400 troop types, and I have 300. So not a problem there. Just got to turn them all over to represent the fact they are now within a fortification. One of them is holding Margaret of Anjou. Okay, so just got to do the housework for Courtenay having been killed. Right, so Courtenay was holding 3 cards. His own title card, the Office of Chancellor of the Duchy of Cornwall, and the town of Lancaster. So Chancellor of the Duchy of Cornwall goes into the Chancery pile, but the other 2 go into the discard pile. And because he lost 3 crown cards, he's entitled to pick up 1 extra, 1 new one, and the one he picked up was the Earl of Oxford. So he's still got, that player's still got 4 nobles on the table, but you know, just look at them. I think you can see, yeah, you can see 2 of them there, but they have very little. 2 of them have, this guy has a title. De Vere is the Earl of Oxford. This guy is even untitled, and very little going on in the way of offices and so on. So the next part of the turn then, because the first player is no longer controlling the king, so can't summon Parliament anyway, and doesn't hold a right, so therefore can't crown anyone either, because they don't yet hold a Yorkist claimant to the throne. So we pick up a card for the end of turn phase, and it's another title, the Earl of Worcester. which I might as well give straight away to Stanley. So that boosts, Stanley is currently in Calais there, so that boosts his troop strength by 30. It's going to make it slightly easier to besiege Calais and seize Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Okay, so now it's player 2's turn, and we start with an event phase. So the first event card we pick up is a Peasant Revolt. So, Constable of Dover Castle to Dover. Just going to have to refresh my memory about whether the Constable of the Dover Castle is actually in play. Having had a sort of break overnight, I've forgotten a lot of the cards that are in play, but I can't see it, so we're going to say he's not in play. The Archbishop of Canterbury I know is in the hand of player 1, hasn't been played yet, and the Marshal of England I think is in the Chancery pile. So have a quick look. Yeah, it is. So no piece gets moved. Okay, and the second event card is an embassy, significant again because it means the king will be moved. So an embassy from the Emperor, that's presumably the Holy Roman Emperor. The king must move to Ravenspurn, and the king is currently under Percy's control in Durham. And where is Ravenspurn? It's not far from there, I don't think. Yeah, it's on the coast. I think you just saw that. It's on the coast, just off the North Sea there. So significant. Okay, and then that was the events phase of player 2's turn. So now that player gets to move. So I'm just going to work out the moves off camera. Okay, so I'm going to attempt the ploy that I was talking about earlier. So in terms of movement, the only movement I've done for player 2 is to move Percy, who is holding the king, from Ravenspurn into the open city of Kingston. So he is now behind fortifications. I'm not going to move either of the other 2 yellow noble pieces on the table. In fact, the other 3, because Greystoke is currently in Hereford there, but there's also this piece there and that piece there that's just been put on the table, De Vere. And the reason I'm not going to move them is that I am now, so there's no combat phase, so there would be a parliament phase, and I am going to summon parliament, partly to show you how this works, but also I think it will work to player 2's advantage because of certain circumstances that are occurring at the moment. Okay, so the first thing you do is you turn one of these Clamour for Parliament cards, which have to be there available on the board for you to be able to summon a parliament. Turn that on its side, and you put the King's Peace marker in the area of where the parliament is being held, and that means that no combat can take place in that area until the end of the combat phase of player 2's next turn. So in other words, peace will prevail in that area for effectively one turn. Now, the players who summon Parliament can summon as many of his nobles as he wants to go to Parliament. So that is what his entire faction is going to do. All the nobles that he controls, which there are 3 more, are all moving to Kingston, and they are allowed to move up to 400 troop strength into Kingston before it's over capacity, and there's no way. Let's just do a quick 110, 130, 180, 210, 240, so they're well below. You can see how weak they are at the moment. And next, he has to summon one player, one piece from the other player's faction, to also attend the Parliament. So he is going to summon the Duke of Suffolk, who is currently controlling Margaret of Anjou. They aren't allowed to go into the fortified city of Kingston because it's currently controlled by Percy and player 2. So they are in the area, but in the open field outside of town, but they are still technically attending Parliament. And then player 1, who has just had one of his pieces summoned, is now allowed to also voluntarily attend Parliament with any pieces that are on the mainland. So this is why I was talking about the particular circumstances at the time, because that player currently has one piece at sea and 2 pieces overseas in Calais. So the only pieces he can move to Parliament are the 3 here. So I think he's going to do that. So all those 3 nobles now attend Parliament. So then in total there are 8 nobles attending the Parliament. Zoom in on that area again so you can see that a bit more closely. It's getting to a point where you can use stack markers, but I don't think I will. If it gets a little bit crowded, you can put a marker to indicate that there's a stack of tokens in that area and put them in the stacking zones. Now, so because there are 8 nobles attending, you take the Chancery cards, count how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right, there are 9 of them. So you have to shuffle those because you're only going to draw 8. Just looking to see what you do with the additional 9. I think you leave it yeah, I think you leave it in the Chancery pile. So you put 1 back in the Chancery pile, and then we look at the other 8 cards that have been drawn. So I'll just change the camera angle and lay them out on the table for you to see. Okay, now here are the 8 cards. They have to be dealt out to the 2 players, but they are dealt by the player who summoned Parliament, which is player 2. So they have to. They don't have to be dealt to the nobles who are attending Parliament, but you still have to obey the rules that only one title can be held by each noble piece, only one office of state can be held by each titled noble. So immediately then I'm going to start by looking, and also this is another part of the ploy, is that player 2 does hold in his hand at the moment 2 title cards. So he is not going to play those, so they're not in play, so he can use the title cards here to award to his players, avoiding him having to give those title cards to player 1. So I'm looking really for only for 1 title card to give to my only untitled noble. So obviously I'm going to pick the Earl of Westmoreland to give to Howard, because that had 40 troop strength and the other title only has 20. And then in terms of officers of state, the Earl of Northumberland is Constable of the Tower of London. So I can give 3 of the player 2's pieces now officers of state. So again, I'm looking for high scoring, high troop strength ones. So I'm going to give the Marshal of England to, it could be anyone, just hand them out willy-nilly. I'll give that to Howard as well. Chancellor of the Duchy of Cornwall, I'm going to give to the Earl of Oxford. And Constable, no, we'll go for this one because it's very strong in Wales. Chamberlain of the County Palatine of Chester, we're going to give to Greystoke. Now that means that I still have 4 cards to apportion. So there are 1, 2, 3 of player 1's pieces that don't have officers. So unfortunately that means I'm not going to be able to discard any of these. I have to hand them out. So I'll give them fairly randomly to those 3 nobles who don't have officers. And then there's a final title. So he is titled Berkeley, doesn't have a title at the moment, so I'm going to make Berkeley the Duke of Exeter. Okay, now you can, if you want, start to at the summoning players. With the summoning players' consent, you can begin to trade those cards and so on. I'm not going to. It just gives me a little bit more of a headache. So what I'm going to do now is I have to rearrange the board because a lot of those offices come with towns and so on that I have to put faction markers on. So I'm going to just do all that off camera and get back to you. Okay, so put lots of faction markers on the map again now. I won't go through all that. So it was quite complex, but the ploy hasn't really shaken things up as much as I hoped it might do. Essentially, it's altered the prestige points for both players. Player 1 has progressed from 10 to 11, whereas player 2 is now on 8 prestige points, so they did gain more prestige points in that parliament than the other player, which was the intention really, but it didn't have the dramatic swing that I thought it might do. But at least you got to see how a parliament worked. So now it's the end turn of player 2's turn, so we pick up a card and it's another noble on the table, Audley. There is Audley's piece now on the table. Quite a good location because it overlaps a road, and player 2 already controls York and Newark, so they've got a clear run down that road from York to Newark now. And I immediately, because he was untitled, I immediately played a card out of player 2's hand and made Audley the Earl of Wiltshire, giving him another 30 troop strength points. So now it is over to player 1 again. So the event phase, we draw 2 cards. The first one is Chancellor may summon Parliament. So he does hold the Chancellor of England card, so we'll give him that card. So later in the game, if there's no king or 2 kings, it allows the Chancellor to summon Parliament. And the other event card is a peasant revolt, and this time the Earl of Kent is obliged to move to Rochester. So is the Earl of Kent on? Yeah, he is. The Earl of Kent is Herbert, who is currently attending Parliament. So it's this piece that's on the top here. So he has to go to Rochester, where there is currently a ship anchored, the Nicholas. Not sure who controls that now. There were a lot of ships put on the table in the last turn. But anyway, we move the Earl of Kent to Rochester, and now it is, who is it? Player 1's movement phase, so I'd work out those moves. Okay, in terms of movement, Scrope has arrived in Calais, meaning that the size of the force for player 1 in Calais is sufficient to be able to besiege Calais and take possession of Richard, Duke of Gloucester. In the north, the 3 remaining nobles who had been summoned to Parliament have crossed over into the adjacent region excuse me, and are about to besiege in his castle Audley, who has only just been put on the table, and they have sufficient strength to capture that castle. And the other move, which I haven't done yet because I thought I would show you on camera, is if you notice here, Herbert, who was summoned to put down a peasants' revolt in Rochester, is occupying an area where there is a continuous road where all the locations are owned by player 1 all the way to Bristol. So just because I can do it, and Bristol is a much more secure location than Rochester, I'm going to move his piece all the way by road to Bristol and put him in behind the city walls there. So that is a very neat way of showing you how control of these locations, you need to know who's controlling each location, and road movement can get you a long way if you do control all their points on the road. Okay, so now it's siege time, so we'll take it, combat time, so we'll take 2 sieges in no particular order. So we'll do Calais down here first of all. So present at that are Scrope, Berkeley and Stanley. So we turn up an event card, and Fitzallen and Berkeley are killed. So Berkeley dies, but that doesn't affect the siege, which was successful, which means that Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is now in the possession of player 1. So I've removed Berkeley from the table, changed the faction markers around on the board. He had the office of Warden of the Northern Marches, so lost the prestige point, but temporarily gained 2 prestige points for having control of Richard, Duke of Gloucester. But he's going to have to decide in the next turn who to bump off, because he can't hold cards from both the Yorkist and the Lancastrian faction for more than one turn. But there's a possibility now. Player 1 is now on 12 prestige points and has to get up to 15 to be able to claim a victory. So I'm going to hang on to that card for the moment. I'm not going to bump him off immediately. And in the meantime, we're going to play the Siege of, where was it? Tick Hill. So this is the Duke of Suffolk. Yeah, the Duke of Suffolk, Grey, who is Chancellor of England, and the Duke of Norfolk, who is Treasurer of England. Oh, one rule that I didn't play earlier, that I think I should have done, was that if you win a siege, and the siege, what was it, the Siege of Oxford, where Courtney was killed, I think players on both sides had nobles in it who held offices of state. Yeah, I think that was the case. So that means that was a major siege, which gives you an additional prestige point. So I'm going to give player, I might be getting this completely wrong, but certainly I haven't played that rule in the game so far, because it was the first occasion when it arose. So that's put player 1 up on 13 prestige points. Okay, so here we go now. So in this case, the siege involves Audley on one side, and he doesn't hold an office of state. So this won't be a major siege. And the event card that we pull is that Bourchier and Herbert are killed. And Herbert is certainly on the table, but he is, as you remember, ensconced in Bristol, so he wasn't involved in the siege. There we go, so Audley has been removed from the table. I killed him rather than ransomed him. So player 2 lost 2 crown cards, drew 1 in compensation, and that card was an office, the steward of the royal household. All the 4 nobles that player 2 is playing currently have offices, so I have to keep that in player 2's hand, and that means that is the end of player 1's turn, and so we just take an end of turn card, see what that says, and it's another ship, the Rose of Plymouth. So there's the Rose of Plymouth, and similar situation to what happened before. Plymouth is currently under the control of player 2, so I'm not sure how you play that, so I put it in the adjacent anchorage at Dartmouth, which is the nearest one. That was the way I played that situation before. We'll carry on doing that. So now it is player 2's turn. So an event phase to begin with. The first event card is Revolt in Wales. This could be significant. So the Chamberlain of the County Palatine of Chester has to move to Rutland, and he was given that title. Yeah, that's Greystoke. He was given that title in the Parliament. So where is he? Presumably still in attending the Parliament. There he is. So Greystoke gets moved to Rutland. didn't quite see that move, but there's Greystoke in Rutland now. And the other event card is another peasant revolt, this time the Constable of the Tower of London and has to move to Blackheath, and Stafford has to move to Leeds Castle. So I think Stafford died, didn't he? Yeah, he definitely died. But the Constable of the Tower of London is on the table. That is Percy, who has control of Henry VI. So that means Henry VI and Percy are being moved to Blackheath, which you may not be able to see. There is Blackheath, just outside of London, and it's an unfortified town. So that has definitely shaken up a little bit the geographical locations of Player 2's pieces. And this is, I think this is Player 2's turn, isn't it? So he now gets to move. So again, I'll switch the camera off while I decide on movements. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation for Player 2 in that those movements have broken up his forces. So basically I've moved the King and Percy from Blackheath to Pevensey, that they still happily control, even though they lost the wardenship of the Cinque Ports, because one of the pieces was in Pevensey at the time that happened. And I've moved the sole ship that they control from Rochester around to Pevensey as well. So in the next turn, hopefully the King will be able to, and Percy will be able to get on board a ship and sail back north towards their forts, their strengths. But the other three nobles I have left where they are, because they're in reasonably strong cities and forts and so on. So there is no combat, which means that is the end of his combat phase, which means that the Parliament is now over. So the King's Peace no longer applies. So we can remove the King's Peace token and the Clamour for Parliament token, but there are still good, I think there's 3 others still there on display, so another Parliament could be summoned, and then the only thing to do is to draw a crown card, and maybe that's of some use because that is Bourchier, who now joins Player 2's faction, and he is untitled, but in Player 2's hand I do hold both a title and an office, so he is immediately going to be made Earl of Pembroke and Steward of the Royal Household. So I've just got to rearrange faction markers on the board for that. Okay, that's sort of some comfort to Player 2, because there's Bourchier on the board now, and his home castle of Pleshy, which is not far from the London area, so he's sort of in the vicinity of the King as well. Okay, so now it is Player 1's turn again, and got to make a decision straight away. I think I don't know whether it goes up to the combat phase, but we have to kill off either Margaret of Anjou and Edward of Westminster, or Richard Duke of Gloucester. So I think Richard Duke of Gloucester is for the chop. So now there are only Lancastrian pieces on the table. So it seems like Player 1 is close to winning the game. He's currently on 13 prestige points, needs to get to 15. And in his hand, he has 2 cards that he hasn't played yet, both of which have 1 prestige point each. One of them is the Archbishop of Canterbury, which he can allocate to any of his nobles, as long as they don't have a clerical title. So that only applies to one of them. So that would give him up. That would take him up to 14. The 15th one is an office of state, Lord of the Isle of Wight, and all his nobles have offices of state. So basically, as soon as he can get another noble into his faction space, he has won the game, because he can give both those 2 prestige points to a noble, and as long as it's a titled noble, and then the game is over. But in the meantime, we'll start off with the event phase of his turn. Getting very low on event cards, so we'll have to shuffle some more into the deck soon. And the first one is a free move. And the second one, and that's the end of the deck. Second one is a peasant revolt, so Holland has to move to Dartington. I think Holland died many turns ago, didn't he? Yeah. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Cornwall has to move to Plymouth. I think that's back on the table. Yep, that's the Earl of Oxford. So he is... Where on earth has he got to? Oh, he's still up in the north in Kingston. So he gets moved to... Where was it? Plymouth. And the Marshal of England, yeah, he's on the table as well. That's Howard. And Howard is also currently in Kingston. He gets moved to Bodmin. So that's quite a strong... well, it's not a fortified town, but the southwest is a good area for player 2. He's got a lot of strength down there anyway. Right, so now I'm just going to see what happens about the event deck, which has run out of cards. Yeah, in the event of the event deck running out of cards, you immediately reshuffle them, but you then include a whole stack of cards that were taken out during game setup. So there are going to be more events happening, different events, and the same events that happened before are likely to reoccur again, but of course you don't know the order that they're going to turn up in and so on, so it just mixes it all up a little bit more, makes it a little bit more random. Things that haven't happened so far might occur. It's quite a nice little mechanism of the game. Right, so we've done the event phase for... which player was it? Which player was it? I'm just going to have to pause again while I try to remember. Yeah, I remember it was player 1 because we just bumped off the Duke of Gloucester. So now it's movement for player 1. So again, I'll just pause while I think about all that. Now, I've just been calculating and recalculating. That's another thing about this game which is slightly cumbersome when your brain gets a bit fogged and so on. But I've been doing lots of mental arithmetic, and I think that player 1 can potentially win the game at this point, because I'm going to make the moves on camera here. The king with the Earl of Northumberland is currently in the castle in Pevensey. Now, I've calculated that the Earl of Northumberland has 170 troop strength, and Pevensey's garrison is 200. That gives him a strength of 370. If I were to move, what's his name? Right, I might have to recalculate this again, excuse me. Yeah, I just doubted my mental arithmetic capacities there for a moment. But if I move Herbert back from Bristol to London, so that was, a mistake last time I moved him out. I move him to London, then I use the free move card I've got to give him another move, so he moves to outside of Pevensey. Meanwhile, Scrope and Stanley both get on board two of the ships here. Don't think it matters which two. One's got a capacity of 150, the other of 100. So they get on board those two ships. They cross the channel and are able to disembark and also be outside of Pevensey. So that gives them a total of 350 troop strength, which wouldn't be enough to overwhelm 370, but in that player one's hand he has a company of Scottish exiles worth 20, and you just have to equal or exceed the number. So I'm going to give the Scottish exiles to Scrope, and that means there will be a siege there where player one will be able to take possession of Henry VI. So I'm not going to move any of the other player one's pieces on the board. The rest of them are up in Tick Hill, up in the north. I'm just going to leave them there because I think this is the end of the game. Right, so we just have to do the combat phase now. So we turn up an event card and it shows that Holland and Audley have died. So Holland wasn't involved in the siege and neither was Audley. No. So that is a major siege because both opponents held offices of state. So that gives player one a major siege card, which is worth another prestige point, but more importantly it gives him control of the king. So Scrope now has, I'll give it to Scrope, but it doesn't really matter. Scrope now has control of the king. I won't bother too much with doing the paperwork for removing Percy for the time being, but he is going to be executed. So we'll take him off the table. So he has his head chopped off. And then if I now calculate right, let me just do, I have to now murder the other members of the House of Lancaster. So Margaret of Anjou and Edward of Westminster. Oh yeah, this would win me the game anyway. Are both executed, leaving player one in control of the sole remaining royal piece. So that gives them the royal victory rather than the prestige victory. So they now claim that. You can claim it any time in the game. At any time, show that your faction or alliance has the last surviving royal piece crowned as king. Your faction or alliance wins a royalty victory immediately. So they have won the game. But just out of interest, let's add up. If I now award the Archbishop of Canterbury to someone, doesn't matter who, give it to anyone, give it to Stanley. So they now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 prestige markers, prestige points. So that would have won them the prestige victory as well. So either way, they have won the game. They've won both the prestige victory and the royalty victory at the same time. So that is the end of the game. So it's going to be a very long video. Not much. I could have cut it down at the beginning, but I wanted to show you the moves in the turns in full and my thought processes and so on. It does, there's a lot in this game. I really like it. I think that the mechanisms work really well to throw up all those unexpected events and so on which have a dramatic effect on the game. The strategy to win makes it a little bit unhistoric. So, for instance, in that last turn, I bumped off 2 of the House of Lancaster, whereas in fact in history, the Lancastrians would have assumed victory had they killed off all their Yorkist opponents. So it's a bit unhistoric. But in fact, thinking about it, I didn't need to bump them off, did I? Because I won the prestige victory. So if I'd kept those other 2 Lancastrian royal pieces on the table, that would have put me up to, that would give me another 4. So I would have been on 19 prestige points. So I could have won the game that way. So that makes sense as well. So I think the changes they've made to Kingmaker, to bring out this Kingmaker II, are a big improvement on what was already an excellent game. So, and I would much rather play on my own like this, playing 2 players, than play the solo game, which is intended as a variant of Kingmaker, the classic Kingmaker game, which is not. My preference is for Kingmaker II, and the solo game, as I said 8 hours ago now, is it's clever, but it's very it's a very mechanical process, and you end up having to obey a template, really work your way through a template in order to work out what you're going to do with the pieces, and it slows it down a lot. As you get used to it, I presume play speeds up. But I much prefer this kind of game, and as I say, I really like the way it brings out a narrative and a little plot going on, and it gets you involved. So I can recommend this game. Thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next video. Bye for now.